The Iowa rivalry game did not go as wanted. Is it time to panic? What do we do? Where do we go today?
You are Locked On Golden Gophers, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Gopher fans? You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And today we are breaking down the Gophers versus Iowa game that took place this past Saturday. I've needed some time to just digest. I needed some time to review. I've needed some time to just look it over and ask questions. And I think that is the biggest thing that fans, coaches, players, everybody needs to do, especially after a loss like this, is ask questions, analyze everything, break it down. Where did we go wrong? How did we go wrong? How do we fix it? What will be different moving forward? Those are critical questions to be asking yourself, not only as a coaching staff, not only from a film breakdown point of view and changing your best, as coaches like to say, but from a fan's perspective. You can't keep seeing the same things over and over and expecting different results. You can't keep watching the same things over and over and keep on going to bat, defending things. And at some point in time, you're going to have to ask the questions of how do we change it? How does it actually get different? And those are the questions that I've had after this Iowa loss. Now, Iowa beats Minnesota down, especially in the second half, 31-14. The Gophers lose. The pig goes back to Iowa City, and it's just an absolutely disgusting feeling. And now I'm not even the one playing the game. I'm not even the one coaching the game. I am not involved in any capacity when it comes to having an effect on the result of this game, but it still feels gross. So you know it feels terrible for those players. You know it feels terrible for those who are going through it, and they're going to want to do better and they're going to want to improve. But how do we do that? Because you look at this game in the first half, showed a lot of promise. This first half gave some hope. The first half, the Gophers had the lead at halftime. But the first half did not last. This is truly a game that was a tale of two halves, and that is not a good thing because it's not the first time it has happened for the Gophers in this season, yet alone last season, yet alone the season before that. We've had too many of these games time and time again where things look good and then all of a sudden it goes to crap. Or when things look bad and then you start to piece things together. Why can't this team seem to play a full 60 minutes more often than not? That's a big question. That's a big something that needs to change immediately and for the long term and consistently. Because if you look at the tale of two halves in this Gophers versus Iowa game, at halftime, Iowa had 107 total offensive yards, with 91 of those coming from rushing. So you think you'd be heading into the halftime, into the locker room, like, okay, look, we've held them to only 107 total yards on offense. That's good. But 91 of those are coming off the ground. How do we slow the ground game? We've clearly slowed down the passing game. They don't want to pass the ball. And so how do we slow down the ground game? How do we adjust? How do we make differences to make sure we can slow and stall that and keep the ball in our offense's hands? But it doesn't seem like that happened whatsoever. On top of that, Iowa was 2 for 7 on third downs. Minnesota was leading in total yardage by nearly a whole 120 yards, which is more yards than what Iowa had overall as a team. Minnesota had 222 total yards offensively in that first half. Minnesota also had a 56% conversion rate on third downs to Iowa's 29%. The only thing that Minnesota didn't have going in their favor was that Iowa had an interception in the first half, but it wasn't too detrimental to the Gophers in the long run because they went into the halftime with a lead. But it all blew up in their face after halftime because Iowa outscored Minnesota 24-0 in the second half. 24-0. That is absurd. On top of that, Iowa had 227 offensive yards to Minnesota's 66. Iowa converted 63% of their third downs to Minnesota's 20%. And Minnesota still had another giveaway. And Minnesota epically collapsed in another terrible second half that led to Minnesota's second loss on the season. Now, I took to social media recently after this because I was shocked by the lack of touches for Darius Taylor because he only had 10 rushing attempts, 6 targets, only 2 receptions in this game. Your best player had the ball looking his way 16 times. 16 times. And that's targets that weren't always completed. So really, he had the ball in his hands 12 snaps in this game. I should have looked up how many total offensive snaps were. I know that there were 37 pass attempts, and then you add up the rushing attempts. So there are probably at least 70 offensive snaps. I would guess it's probably closer to 80 just due to dropbacks that were maybe sacks or dropbacks that were not thrown away or just led to a QB scramble or things like that. I would guess there's close to almost 80 offensive snaps, and Darius Taylor touched the ball on 12 of them. That's unacceptable. Your best player only seeing the ball in his hands 12 times is absurd. And then it got a little bit weirder for me when Coach Fleck says to the media on Monday morning, I thought we did a really good job in the first half. You're right. I thought you did a good job in the first half too. But then he went on to say, but again, you're not going to stop Caleb Johnson, the Iowa running back. He said, you're not going to stop him. When somebody is that good and their offensive line is so good, I don't think you're just going to stop them. So let's walk that back a little bit because Caleb Johnson was not seen as a top 5 running back coming into this year's Big Ten Conference. I would say both of the Ohio State running backs were up there. Both of the Penn State running backs were up there. And then you could make a case for the Rutgers running back, Michigan running back, Darius Taylor. I would say those 7 got a lot of the love when it came to the top 7-ish running backs in the Big Ten Conference. And what you did not see was Caleb Johnson. In fact, Caleb Johnson was a 3rd string running back to kick off this season. Now, I'm not taking away from Caleb Johnson because I have been preaching about Caleb Johnson and how I think he is very talented and could be a top tier running back since his freshman season. You can go back. You can check the tapes. I can pull it for you if you really want me to prove it. But what I'm saying is that is not how Caleb Johnson has been seen over the course of his career as someone who you're just not going to stop them. But taking it a step back, him saying that you have a player who's that talented, you're not going to stop them. And you have a good offensive line, you're not going to stop them. Isn't that what Darius Taylor and the Gophers are supposed to be? Isn't Darius Taylor supposed to be a guy that you're not going to stop him? And a Gophers offensive line that has a ton of starters coming back and it's supposed to be pretty good. And so Darius Taylor, you're not going to stop him. That was the sentiment heading into this season, was that Darius Taylor was a dude and that you're not going to stop him. But the Gophers gave him 10 attempts in this game. To me, that doesn't make sense. And that statement is so weird because that's how PJ Fleck should see Darius Taylor. Yes, we want to see more passing. Yes, we saw more passing, 37 pass attempts in this game, but that doesn't mean your best player, your running back, shouldn't have 18 carries, 20 carries. I'm not asking for him to go to 40 or 35 or anything like that, but there's no reason, no excuse, no anything that Darius Taylor shouldn't have at least 20 rushing attempts in this game. I don't care that Iowa's defense was a top 5 rushing defense. We came into this week saying, yes, don't force the run game. Don't just force it. Be innovative, be creative, spread your offense out, keep it unpredictable, but don't take your best player basically out of the scheme. That doesn't make any sense either. So a lot of people rebutted on Twitter. A lot of people were like, the key word is that our offensive line isn't good. He said a good offensive line. Minnesota's offensive line was good last year. Technically, 4 of the starters from last year are back this year. Now, yes, Martez has been replaced by Ashton Beers, and he's still figuring things out. Greg Johnson, who has a ton of upside as a young guy, is still working his way through some things. But Ariante Ursa was getting first-round draft hype. Tyler Cooper, Quinn Carroll, both of them were getting Senior Bowl looks, Shrine Bowl looks. So the offensive line was very similar to last year where they were a good offensive line. So why has it gotten bad? There's another question we need to ask ourselves. Why has the offensive line gotten bad this year with so much returning production? And offensive line aside, regardless, your best player, 10 touches rushing is not enough. I'm not calling for 30 or 40, like I said, but 10 is not giving your back, your dude, your stud, the opportunity to be special in this game. You're not even giving him a chance to be special in this game. And with that, in the second half, there were 6 rushing attempts to your top 2 running backs between Darius Taylor and Marcus Major. 6 rushing attempts, and 4 of those were back to back to back to back in your first drive in the third quarter, and got you a first down. Not only did it get you a first down, it got you one of 3 first downs in the entire second half. Now, most of this game, it was a single score lead. It was a 10-point lead. You shouldn't be completely abandoning the run game in a 10-point lead with 14 minutes left in the fourth quarter. That's just, especially when running is supposedly your thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. It left me with a lot of questions. There were mishaps. There was ugly. The second half was brutal. And yet we could possibly see it again play out a very similar way this Saturday versus Michigan, who will play the exact same style versus Minnesota. So next, we're going to dive into 3 areas where Minnesota has to improve immediately if they want to even have a competitive game against Michigan on the road. If they don't want to get utterly destroyed by Michigan in their first away game, we're going to break down the 3 things that need to be fixed immediately coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about our friends over at 5 Hour Energy, because look, when you have to stay up late and watch that Gophers game, when you have to stay up late and get these podcasts out, whatever you're doing where you have to stay up late and you need that extra push, you need that extra energy when you first get up and coffee just doesn't do the trick. Look, you need to head on over and get your friends at 5 Hour Energy and pick up a 5 Hour Energy, because it helps you fix tired fast. Whether you have a long to-do list for work or do it yourself projects at home, take a 5 Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off the list. If you're like me, you always have a large list of to-dos, a large list of projects, a large list of things you want to get done, and there's not enough hours in the day, but 5 Hour Energy will make sure you have the energy with the hours that you do have. You can get in the zone with 5 Hour Energy shots, giving you a feeling of alertness and energy you need to get in the zone. Now, the best things about them: 0 sugar, convenient portable size, and it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. On top of that, they have flavors galore, and you can go to their website at 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com, and you can build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it gets delivered right to your door. And since you're a Locked On Golden Gophers listener, you can use promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. So 20% off by using promo code LOCKEDONCFB over at 5hourenergy.com. That's the number 5hourenergy.com to get your pick-me-up for the days, to get your to-do list done for the days. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, Gophers fans, look, that Iowa game was a headache, and now we have Michigan, and now we're going on the road, and now we need to talk about the 3 areas Minnesota has to improve immediately, like yesterday, because Michigan's going to run a very similar offensive style that we just saw to Iowa. They might not pass the ball very much. In fact, I think in the win against USC, they had less than 50 passing yards in that game, and they beat USC, who is seen as one of the best teams in the Big Ten Conference. The Gophers are going to have to get it together if they want to have any chance at being competitive in this game. So the 3 things that Minnesota has to clean up immediately are the following. Number 1, you have to clean up your gosh dang tackling. And that's my friendly way of saying it, because this is a friendly podcast, family friendly. We got to do it clean. But you got to clean up your tackling or get off the field, because Minnesota's lack of tackling fundamentals against P4 opponents has literally been embarrassing to watch. On top of that, it has cost you 2 games that you could have at least been in the fight, but at least won. UNC, you absolutely should have won. In this Iowa game, if you don't play completely abysmal in the second half, it should at least be a down-to-the-wire game. Now, it didn't end up being that way because Minnesota just shot itself in the foot down the line. But what was most embarrassing was the lack of tackling fundamentals, the lack of finished tackles, the amount of missed tackles forced yet again. You have the talent. You have the ability to compete in these games against Iowa, against North Carolina, against USC, against Rutgers, against Wisconsin, Illinois. All those teams are showing improvements and showing that they can compete in this conference. But what have the Gophers done to show they can compete in this conference? They've shown flashes, they've shown glimpses, but they haven't shown a full 60 minutes. And I think a lot of that comes from coaching right now, because if you don't have your guys ready to play a full 60 minutes, what are you doing? And it starts with tackling fundamentals on the defensive side for the Gophers. Because if you can't execute the fundamentals, then you don't deserve to win. It's that simple. 20 missed tackles versus North Carolina and 13 missed tackles versus Iowa, when both teams really couldn't pass the ball and they were one-dimensional, very one-dimensional teams. The thing that Gophers have been for many years, one-dimensional, couldn't pass the ball, people load the box, and all of a sudden they try to slow your run game. That's the type of offenses the Gophers were playing against, and they couldn't find a way to slow them down. You know what is coming, but you still can't find an adjustment or find an answer or find a way to stop it. That's not acceptable. And you have to clean it up. Otherwise, you're going to get demolished by Khalil Mullings. You're going to get demolished by Alex Orji. You're going to get demolished by Donovan Edwards this weekend against Michigan at 11 a.m. at the Big House. And Gophers fans are going to be tapped out completely if you get demolished at the Big House. They're not going to show up to they'll probably still show up to the USC game because it's the first time USC is coming here. But a lot of people want to travel to UCLA. You have to give them a reason. And right now, the Gophers aren't doing that. So you have to clean up your tackles. Number 2, halftime adjustments have to be better. And this comes down to coaching, straight up and straight away. Even in the wins, the second half adjustments, the second halves in general have been sloppier. They've been less efficient. They haven't been great. They haven't been the best thing to write home about. In the Nevada game, we had 195 yards passing in the first half. In the second half, because we didn't have to, but it was still sloppy, we went 2 for 6, I believe, for -4 yards passing. There's no reason you should have -4 yards passing. I don't care if you only pass the ball 6 times. It's sloppy. And that's what the Gophers have been in the second halves of most of their games. Even in their victories, they've been sloppy. And that comes from adjustments. That comes from lack of adjustments. That comes from lack of details. And that's why I am disappointed in this Gophers team. And they have to fix it moving forward, not just for Michigan, but beyond. The other teams are adjusting. So why does it feel like Minnesota is complacent in that department? If that trend continues, you might only have 2 more games on the schedule that you can potentially win. Not even for sure win, potentially win. You have to make adjustments. You have to make them quickly, and you have to be able to change things up from what you saw in the first half. If you can't adjust, you will not beat Illinois. We've seen Bielema do it. You won't beat Wisconsin. You won't beat Rutgers. Those things will not happen if you cannot make consistent and usable adjustments at the half to slow things down that were working in the first half, to capitalize or fix things that went wrong in the first half. If you can't make the adjustments, this team is going to be doomed. And yet you're probably going to need 2 of those 3 games of Illinois, of Wisconsin, of Rutgers. You're probably going to need 2 out of the 3 of those to even get to a bowl opportunity. Because the 2 potential wins I see on the schedule still are UCLA and Rutgers. But beyond that, you're going to have to play your best ball to get 2 more. You're going to have to play your best ball against Wisconsin that lost their quarterback for the year, against Illinois, who is balling out and just took down Nebraska as well, against Rutgers, who is a good team. You got to fix it, and it all starts with halftime adjustments and tackling fundamentals, like we've mentioned. The third thing that needs to be adjusted heading into this week is you have to get Darius Taylor involved and keep Daniel Jackson involved. Something that I have noticed across the board from this season especially, but even a lot of games last season, is we haven't seen a game with both Daniel Jackson and Darius Taylor going off. And there's no reason why they both can't have very, very successful games. I'm not talking about like one has a mediocre game and one has a very big game. Both of them can have big games. It is okay. That is feasible. Other teams do it. Success from one should help lead to the success for the other. It should open things up for the other. If Darius Taylor is going off on the ground, that should help the passing game open up because people are going to try to add a hat to the box, try to slow the run game down. That should bring up play action opportunities for Daniel Jackson. That should bring up screen routes for Daniel Jackson to get the ball into his hands, to get people to back off a little bit, and then you can run it again. On the flip side, if the passing game is working, it should help spread the team out, help spread the offense out, spread the defense out, so that way there's bigger holes for your running back to get through. But we don't see that very often from this Gophers team. On top of that, Darius Taylor getting less than 18 attempts isn't acceptable. And similarly, Daniel Jackson getting less than 8 targets feels like it's a misuse of his talent. There are dozens and dozens of programs in this country, in the nation, that have a stud running back, some of them 2 stud running backs, and they have a stud wide receiver with their running backs, or 2 stud wide receivers to pair with a stud running back, and they find a way to feed them opportunities naturally to them all. So why can't the Gophers figure that out? If it doesn't have to be rocket science, but it feels like Minnesota can't find a way to do it, and they need to in a hurry. You have the personnel, you have the talent, you have some studs on this team. Max Brosmer is very competent, and he's just shown good placement, good decision making, and what have you. Daniel Jackson is a baller and an all Big Ten type receiver. Darius Taylor is an all Big Ten type player at running back. You have to find a way to capitalize with all of them. So those are the major changes I need to see from Minnesota starting in this Michigan week and moving forward. These changes are the only chance Minnesota has at even keeping this Michigan game competitive, but also finding a way towards hopefully winning more games in the season. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about today is 3 Gophers that need to step up in this next coming week. 3 Gophers that need to step up. We're jumping into that coming up next. First, I want to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel, because NFL fans, if you are listening, and you probably are with your Minnesota Vikings being 3-0 and taking down some big teams, San Francisco, Houston Texans, like, good on you. I'm not a Vikings fan, but more power to them. I'll show credit where credit is due. And you can start the season big with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you can place bets over on FanDuel, and you will get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's free money in your pocket. All you have to do is place a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com. So definitely check out FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook partner of Locked On. All right. Lastly, we're going to talk about 3 Gophers we need to step up in this next upcoming week, especially. And I got creative with this one. So notice the stress on Gophers here. And the first one I kind of cheated because I put the entire offensive line, because plain and simple, each week, one offensive lineman has been graded well. One offensive lineman has been graded average, and then usually the other 3 have been graded below average. That isn't acceptable. Now, it's changed from here and there, and different guys have had good games. We need all 5 of our offensive linemen to have a good game together, not once, not twice, but for the rest of the season. It's getting ridiculous. You have 3 guys that are getting Senior Bowl looks. You got to put it together. You have one of the best offensive line coaches in the nation. You got to clean it up. I just don't understand where the disarray has come from. And the Gophers have to fix it in a heartbeat. We have one of the best offensive line coaches and a bunch of returning talent, so there needs to be a come to Jesus moment for this team, especially on the offensive line, because if the Gophers can't figure it out and be able to run the ball better, they might only win 1 or 2 more games for the rest of the season. And that will take a massive toll on this program. Having a losing season, but potentially one of the worst seasons in the Big Ten Conference in the first year of 18, that's going to tank morale for recruiting. That's going to tank morale for trying to get transfer options to come here. That's going to tank morale for people wanting to donate to NIL. Being a bottom-tiered team in the Big Ten could put your program 3 years behind. Truly. So the Gophers have to figure this out. And they have to do it now. You have to find a way to compete with the Michigan and then find a way to compete with the USC. And even if you don't win those games, keep them close and keep your morale and confidence moving. So that way you go to UCLA, you take that win by storm, you take that Maryland win by storm, and you keep on moving through the rest of the season with confidence and being able to get to a bowl game or get to 7 wins and build some momentum. But it all starts with the offensive line. Now, on the flip side, on the defense, a player that needs to step up is Ja Joyner, plain and simple. Like, he is one of my favorite players on this defense, bar none. But our defense needs pressure on the quarterback, and they need it to relieve the work that this secondary is having to do, relieve the coverage time that these DBs are having to face. And on top of that, to help slow down the run game, because there's pressure coming in every which way, and you can get tackles for loss and what have you, and you can get sacks on the quarterback, and you can generate turnovers and chaos and what have you. That's what this defense is predicated on, and Ja Joyner is supposed to be a staple of that. But Ja Joyner had all the hype coming into the season about being a double-digit sack getter, and the Gophers' first double-digit sack getter in many, 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 many years. And as of today, Ja Joyner only has a half sack on the season through 4 games. He only has 8 pressures on the season so far. This is a player who had 46 pressures last year, 32 the year prior. Double-digit sacks is still attainable, but you have to get after it and start putting these things together and putting pressure and stress on the quarterbacks, plain and simple. And he needs some big games to make it happen. This Gophers defense needs him to be at his best so they can be at their best. And Ja Joyner, we need him to step up in this next one. And then finally, the third and final Gopher that needs to step up is PJ Fleck. And there's a reason I said Gophers that need to step up instead of players, because PJ Fleck, it's time to change our best. You have mentioned changing your best for years and years and years. And we only can listen to, I didn't do enough, or I didn't have these guys prepared, or I didn't have these guys prepared to play a full 60 minutes. That's on me. We only can hear that so many times. And we've heard it last year in the Northwestern game, last year in the Illinois game, 2 years ago in the Purdue homecoming game, a few years ago in the Bowling Green game. We only can hear it so many times. And even looking at this season, we've heard it multiple times. Fool me once, UNC, shame on you. Fool me twice, Iowa, shame on me. Step it up, because there can't be a fool me 3 times. If this is yet another year of losing to a Michigan or an Ohio State or a Penn State or what have you, one of the top tier schools by 30 plus points because we're being a conservative and we're just playing not to lose by a lot as opposed to trying to take a swing to win against the big dog, if we see that again, that's not changing your best. So we're going to find out this weekend. Are we changing our best? Are we going after it? Are we taking risks? Are we trying to hit the big plays, trying to beat Michigan on the road? Are we just trying to lose by the least amount of points? Are we keeping it safe? Are we running in the weirdest situations and what have you? Because if that's the case, that is not changing your best. That is doing something, the same thing, over and over and over again and expecting different results. That is called insanity. So PJ Fleck, you are on the list as well of the Gophers we need to step up in week 4. That's going to do it for us here at Locked On Golden Gophers today. Now, tomorrow we're going to dive into the strengths, weaknesses, and keys for this Michigan matchup and 3 players to slow down and my biggest concerns for this game. So be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube so you don't miss that moving forward. And you're definitely going to want to be on this week's predictions episode, because me and Tristyn, I feel like it's going to be a crazy one this week. So definitely hit subscribe. I'll see you then. Row the boat, Sky, my Go Gophers, as always. And please don't forget to hit subscribe.